Welcome everyone, I'm Judge Schlackman, and for this video I'll be speaking about the topic of connection, our desire for connection, and how that interacts with our fears or anxieties about disconnection, about rejection, abandonment, loss, and so on. If we observe our social interactions, the way people relate to one another, we see these phenomena really as fundamental to our human social development. We all have a deep desire for connections. We're social beings. We're naturally meant to interact with one another, to form bonds. If we think of it on a spiritual or deeper kind of metaphysical level, we could consider the idea that as spiritual beings, we all come from an original unified source, a source where all consciousness really is connected, where there isn't separation. And then as creation manifests and unfolds, we individuate, we disconnect in some sense from that original source. So we're experiencing that original disconnection into an individuated or separate identity. And in that process, there's kind of a core archetypal trauma, we might call it, that occurs, that sense of separation where we desire the original connection, we desire to be unified, to be reunited with that source which contains all the other individuated beings. So when we come into this dualistic plane and interact with other people, we're kind of replaying this dynamic of feeling separated, fearing to have more of that trauma or more of that sense of separation, while at the same time also desiring that reconnection. So all of this is happening on multiple levels. We're separating and disconnecting while also desiring to reconnect, to reunite. And there's this constant interplay there in our human relationships where we're desiring connection, we're seeking out relationships. On some level, we want to connect with people, to bond with them, to attach. While at the same time, there's the awareness that when we have those relationships, it's not permanent, it's not certain. There's always the potential and, in a way, an inevitability that we're going to experience some form of disconnection. So we might experience a rejection, some form of betrayal, some form of abandonment, and of course loss. With any physical human relationship, at some point someone's going to leave or someone's going to physically die and pass on. So that is a form of loss, of course, and we grieve it. It's not pleasant to experience that, but it is part of life, part of being a human being, having that life experience. And so as we seek out connections and bonds, subconsciously at least, we're also aware that inevitably we will experience some form of loss. So if we're trying to avoid feeling a deep pain or suffering of loss, we may also resist or avoid having a deep bond or connection. the deeper the bond and connection, the more intense the feeling of loss would be when it occurs. So as a protective mechanism, people may resist having a deep bond, a deep attachment. So you'll see all of this plays out in all of our relationships. The interplay between the desire to connect and the fear of the experience of disconnection. And this is helpful for us to explore and be aware of as we reflect on how we relate to other people, on how we pursue or avoid relationships, especially close relationships. We can look at our own social history, our own social patterns, how we relate to one another, and also how we feel about ourselves. So if we're resisting experiences or relationships to avoid suffering, rejection, abandonment, loss, we can consider how we've processed those experiences and perhaps finding resources or skills to process those in a way where we're not so traumatized by it, where we don't feel isolated, we don't feel there's something wrong or defective about ourselves, where we can kind of have more inner peace, more balance or harmony within our own being, no matter what's occurring in these different relationships in our lives. So to have more of that inner balance in a sense, where if someone leaves you, you're not desperate and traumatized by it. If someone seemingly rejects you, you don't feel there's something awful about yourself. If someone passes on in your life, you're able to get to a point of acceptance and to trust that we'll have other relationships appear in our life. The void is never permanent. We're naturally going to continue to meet other people, to form other bonds and relationships. Our journey is ongoing in that sense. We're meant to have a variety of relationships in our life, to have different forms of connections where we learn about ourselves, where we share our own being with other people. So as you're able to navigate those things more, let's say, maturely or more masterfully, then you won't be as afraid or anxious about experiencing future suffering. You'll trust that you'll be able to go through things and that you'll be all right. So you can then be more open, more allowing of self-expression, of connection with others. You won't be as restricted or constricted in how you're relating to other people. You'll be able to kind of flow more in your life, to trust things are unfolding. You'll connect with the people that you're ready to connect with or meant to connect with at any given time. Those relationships will kind of follow their course for as long as is needed or appropriate. And if a relationship dissolves or ends, it's not the end of the world. It's just part of your journey. It's just a chapter in your life story. It's not your whole life. And just like any book with chapters, all the chapters need to be there to create the complete story. You wouldn't want to just be stuck in a certain chapter and not move beyond that. Your journey or your story would be incomplete. So we can think of our relationships in our lives in a similar way, that each of them is just a part of the whole story, a part of our whole life journey. And some of them will last a very long time, some of them won't. That's okay. It's not something that's bad about us or wrong with us. It's just part of our evolution. So we can recognize that we are going to continue in some way to desire more attachments and connections, relationships of different kinds in our life. That's innate to who we are. We can never completely shut it down or extinguish it, because we are meant to in some way reconnect or reunite with those other aspects of our core divine self. So if you think of that self as having fragmented and projected itself into all these different identities, on some level they all reconnect with each other in the original source. So we're never actually separate from anyone or anything else that appears to be external to us. On a certain level, it's all united in one field of existence or one field of creation. So with that understanding, that level of appreciation of our essential nature, we can see why we're naturally guided to desire connections. We can also understand that aspect of ourself that may feel traumatized by some separation, and the desire to avoid experiencing that suffering of separation, but also to know that we can get through that it's just temporary, that we're not going to be overwhelmed by it. It's just part of this ongoing experience of separation or loss that's part of having an individuated consciousness. So I appreciate each of you for being part of this discussion or conversation, for exploring these ideas. And for those that are interested in holistic health and spiritual growth or personal development, I invite you to visit my website. It's phinsights.com, phinsights.com. You can find lots of resources and links there. And I also have events listed that are coming up, and information about individual healing and counseling services. For now, I would like to wish each of you a wonderful day. Namaste.